Welcome to Community Office Hours. This is the Boundary edition. Today we have a full house. You'll notice the Brady Brunch view almost of the Boundary team. Say that 3 times fast. Anyway, so today we're talking about HCP Boundary, HashiCorp Cloud Platform Boundary. And we have a whole bunch of people who are here to talk about it, answer your questions. We'd love for you to interact and chat. If you have not joined us for office hours before, we love for you to put your comments, feedback questions in the comments or in the live chat. Do ask them. We're here for all of your questions. But as you do, be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient at all times. Be considerate and be professional. If you have any questions about our community guidelines, you can look at them at hashicorp.com/community-guidelines. Now, we're going to get started because there's a lot of content to cover. And we have a lot of people here. So we're going to start, I guess, in the order by which they're going to be speaking today. So we'll go Pete, XingLu, Bo, Johan, and then Randy. So if you could introduce yourselves and what you do on the Boundary team, that'd be great.
Sure, I guess I'll go first. My name is Pete Pacent. I lead product management for Boundary. I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the new features available within Boundary, and then most specifically give folks a little bit of an overview of our HCP Boundary Beta, which is a cloud service of our offering, as well as kind of MC some of the Boundary related content. And then with me from the product team is XingLu, who will be speaking about some of the features within Boundary that I'll let him chat through. XingLu, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. I'm XingLu, and I'm also a product manager on the Boundary team, mostly working on ecosystem and software-defined perimeter. Today, I'll be talking a bit about Boundary's access model and some new features we're bringing with HCP Boundary. And yeah, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Well, I think that's me. Hi. Sorry. So my name is Sorawis. I also go by Bo. I'm on the HCP Boundary, the cloud team. So I'm working on the HCP, the platform, the cloud platform version of Boundary, and I'll be deploying clusters and connecting to targets through HCP Boundary.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Johan, and I work on the backend team at Boundary. And today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a demo for a new feature in 0.8, which is available in OSS Boundary, which is audit logs. And I'll pass it along to Randall.
Hey everyone, my name is Randall Morey. I usually go by Randy. I'm the front-end engineering lead on Boundary. I'll be demoing some IAM enhancements in admin UI today so that you can get a bit more granular with your permissions. Thank you.
Awesome. So I guess we'll get started with Pete then. I believe you're going to go through an overview. So if you could share your slides.
Yeah.
Put them up.
Let's do it. Everybody can see them?
Yep, we can see them.
Okay. And I'm not muted. All right, excellent. Then let's talk a little bit about Boundary as well as kind of HCP Boundary. So for anybody new to Boundary for the first time, I always feel like I should give the elevator pitch for Boundary. We've been in market for about 1.5 years, but at the same time, we still have new folks coming in. So bear with me a little bit where I kind of give a little bit of an overview for those who are new. So very much kind of as a company, Boundary or HashiCorp kind of focuses on developing provider agnostic development tools for each step in kind of the app delivery lifecycle. One of the things that we try to do across our various zero trust tools is kind of create a common model for authenticating, authorizing, and auditing different types of transactions that you might have across your digital environment for applications in the case of Vault, networks in the case of Console, and people in the case of Boundary. So whereas something like Vault, which folks might be very familiar with, is very much kind of a common workflow for secrets management and machine authentication and authorization for your different kind of inner application communication, Boundary is very much a common workflow for basically managing human to machine access comprehensively. So integrating with your kind of company's SSO provider for authentication, granularly authorizing what actions a user can take against remote infrastructure endpoints, and then really kind of creating an audit trail around that system of record of what happened against what types of sessions were created across that landscape. So within this overall workflow, Boundary kind of does a couple of different things that we try to do, regardless of the environment that you're on. We very much kind of deal with technical users and managing their access to infrastructure endpoints. So ultimately, if you have some concept of a developer trying to access some remote system, that could be SSH access to a remote Linux host, that could be a self-managed Kubernetes cluster where you need to authenticate and authorize actions to kubectl, or a database running in Azure, just by way of example. The whole idea with Boundary is that you have kind of a common workflow for managing that developer's access. So specifically with Boundary, you can authenticate with your kind of organization's identity provider of choice. You can ultimately have very granular authorizations that govern specifically what systems that human can connect to and what actions they can take against that system. When it comes time to actually resolve the route to an endpoint, Boundary can automate the discovery of new services and onboard them to the access solution and kind of apply common sets of security policies for newly deployed or changed resources. There's a couple ways we can do that. One is through our fully instrumented Terraform provider. Another way is with kind of our dynamic host catalogs, whereby Boundary can reach out to external providers like AWS or Azure and automate the ingestion of newly deployed hosts and services based off of providers' metadata. So I can, like if I'm using AWS, I can onboard all services matching a administrator-defined filter, like all resources within subscription foo of type EC2 as an example, and onboarding those dynamically and kind of applying the same set of security policies to those resources that get onboarded. And then ultimately, after I've kind of authenticated that user, authorized that user, and brought in the configuration info to discover a route to that endpoint, Boundary creates a just-in-time access model at multiple different levels. So one way is at the actual network level. Boundary fundamentally is a proxy between the clients and endpoints that a user needs to connect to, and can grant time-limited network access to a remote private endpoint without actually exposing that service to the public internet. So Boundary can effectively broker that network access on a time-limited basis. Similarly, Boundary can also restrict access to the actual credentials required to authenticate to that ultimate end service or target that a user might be trying to connect to. So with integrations with HashiCorp Vault or Boundary's own native secret store, which XingLu will talk about in a little bit, Boundary can provide credentials on that might be required for that session. So minting a single-use username and password if used with, as an example, Vault's one-time password secrets engine for SSH could be an example of that kind of like just-in-time credential management that you can do as part of this kind of comprehensive workflow within Boundary. And then ultimately, one core idea with this is that we audit exactly the transactions that happen against those endpoints, so the sessions that get created. And Johan will talk a little bit about audit events within Boundary, but one thing that we can do is create a record of all sessions that get created within Boundary, as well as other types of actions that get performed. So that ultimately you can kind of have this consistent access model regardless of where your host or service resides, that ultimately conforms with these principles of zero trust, so that every single action or point of access is authenticated, authorized, and audited. So one of the things we're really excited about recently was the launch of HCP Boundary Beta last month. We haven't had a chance to talk about that in office hours with the community, but that's one of the biggest developments that we've really had since Boundary launched originally in October of 2020. So the whole idea with this is that you have a highly available managed service of Boundary, so that you can create this common access model in a way where you don't ultimately need to manage the infrastructure front, creating that Boundary proxy cluster. So the whole idea with this is that we are kind of launching this beta service, or have launched this beta service that's now freely available and open to the public to kind of use and get their hands on. We're building up kind of capabilities as we push towards a GA. Sometime in the future, haven't announced dates with that. But a couple key things about that is that all beta instances will be fully upgradable to GA. So people can rest assured that they can play around with their beta environments, start to do some preliminary configuration, maybe do POCs within their teams, and then ensure that those environments will be fully upgradable to GA. Also highly recommend Terraform as a method of configuration for Boundary, because it's a very easy way to do it, and kind of saves all state in a persistable way that can be applied to newly deployed instances as well. And then the other kind of key thing that XingLu will be talking about is this flexible worker topology within Boundary. So one of the key ideas is with Boundary is that this is as kind of an access solution for infrastructure endpoints, you're securing some of the most sensitive information and systems in your entire environment. And we want to make sure that as a cloud service, we're cognizant of that and kind of build from the ground up to be used in even those highly secure or highly regulated environments. And one way that we kind of want to work towards that is in supporting flexible worker topologies, so that Boundary nodes can be deployed either in a topology where it's managed by HashiCorp, or in a way that it's managed by customers. So with that being said, I think we can kick over to XingLu to talk a little bit about these self-managed workers. I think that the last point that I just kind of drive home with HCP Boundary is this idea that it's a one-click deployment for HCP, that ultimately it provides the same kind of workflow as Boundary OSS provides. So this whole idea of automating the onboarding of users and targets, and ultimately creating a common workflow for your developers to access their remote systems.
Thanks, Pete. I wanted to ask a couple questions to both of you, since we're at a bit of a stopping point or transition point. Someone asked, will Boundary have documentation comparing Boundary with other similar products? Mostly just so folks know similarities, but have an understanding from an industry perspective what other tools are available.
That is an excellent question. I don't want to promise dates or anything like that, but we have a draft of one such document available internally that we plan to release shortly. Similar to some of the other project.io sites from HashiCorp tools, there's kind of like, I think Waypoint versus other software is a great example of a page. We plan to have a similar kind of Boundary versus other software that doesn't so much compare Boundary feature by feature versus other tools, specific tools in the industry, but rather kind of compares Boundary as a class of, or Boundary as a workflow to other kind of classes of solution, whether that's like privileged access management, or these various different industry terms to describe the various human access workflows. But yeah,
awesome.
great question.
And there's a second comment, or a little bit of feedback. Someone mentioned that they would love it if HCP Boundary worked with a private HCP vault. Can either of you comment on that?
So we can comment on that. For folk, well, I'll say that for GA, we are making the commitment that HCP Boundary can be used with private vault environments. That being said, though, how we plan to go about doing that is actually a really good segue to exactly what XingLu is going to talk about. So I might suggest, XingLu, do you want to just kind of give a little bit of an overview of the access model, because I think it ties in perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can answer that question during the access model portion.
All right, that's actually the question, the only question we had at that time. So let's talk about the access model then.
Yeah, great. And thanks, Pete, for introducing Boundary and HCP Boundary. So as a summary, if you're not familiar with Boundary's access model, Boundary consists of two main components. On top, you'll see we have the control plane, and on the bottom, we have something called the data plane. So the control plane is composed of controllers, and these controllers are what the your end user will log into and authenticate to. So for example, if you're using Okta to log in, that's communicated through the control plane. Control plane communicates with Okta or any other IDP. And once you're in, the control plane is what tightly controls which targets the user has access to. So the user will be able to see a list depending on the role that they've been assigned. The control plane also works with Boundaries integrations with things like secret managers, such as our Vault integration, with our dynamic host catalogs, and also with Boundaries' internal backend. So that's the control plane. So once the user has been authenticated to the control plane and has selected the target they want to connect to, their information is then given to a worker. And once the user is ready, exactly as shown as the pink line here, the user session will be proxied through the worker to the target system. And in this model, the user session is not going through the control plane at all. Everything is done through the worker. And right now it is a transparent worker that will connect them to the target system. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So with HCP Boundary, we have, as Pete mentioned, flexible deployment topologies to meet your access needs. And right now there are two types. So the first one is fully managed through HCP. So both the control plane and the workers are managed by HashiCorp. This way, you don't need to worry about scaling and deploying and managing all your controllers and your workers. The second deployment option is what we call using self-managed workers. So let's say you're in a tightly regulated industry, or you're just trying to access private networks or virtual private clouds. In those cases, you don't want to expose your network to the broader internet. So what Boundary allows you to do is place a self-managed worker or a private worker in those networks. And as long as that worker has communication and the ability to reach the controller, that is okay. So with self-managed workers, only the worker is exposed to the internet, to the control plane, and all of the traffic and session information is only proxied through the worker. The user would still log into the HCP control plane, but all the session information is going through the worker. And to add on to this, with the question about private vaults and HCP vault, as Pete mentioned, we're working on a connectivity solution to reach those private vaults, and that will involve using private workers with the network of that private vault instance. We can go on to the next slide. And I just wanted to talk about one more new feature that we introduced in Boundary 0.9, which is about a month ago, and that is the static credential store. So we know that a lot of Boundary users love using Vault, but there are still a lot of new Boundary users who maybe don't have Vault or haven't used a secrets manager before. And that's why we built the static credential store within Boundary. It's just a simple and static store that's encrypted and all all built into Boundary. And right now we currently support username and passwords, and we're looking at new credentials to add to that in the future. And I will pass it on to demo, I think.
All right. I think we have a couple questions, so product-oriented questions. So I'm going to add Pete back to the stream. Okay, so there are a couple questions. First, are there plans to add HCP Boundary to the HCP Terraform provider?
That is an excellent question. So that is very much kind of on the roadmap for instrumentation to that HCP Terraform provider. So the idea with that, just to disambiguate, Boundary itself has a Terraform provider that you can use to configure all of kind of the logical resources within Boundary. So things like onboarding new external services that you want to use as Boundary targets. So if I go back to that EC2 example, if I deploy an EC2 instance in AWS, and I want to be able to access it remotely through Boundary, I can use Boundary's Terraform provider to actually onboard that as a target and kind of set its access permissions. Separately, though, HCP itself, HashiCorp's Cloud Platform, has a Terraform provider that you can use to deploy the HashiCorp services that run on HCP. So right now, Boundary deployment of the HCP Boundary Beta is not available on that HCP Terraform provider. We will add support for that. That being said, the actual Boundary Terraform provider can be used against HCP Boundary and do all of the configuration that you might already do with Boundary OSS, just to kind of disambiguate those two different things, but that's an excellent question. On this point around the static credential store within Boundary, I just wanted to kind of ask a question or like one that I get a lot that I'd want to share with the community is, okay, what's the deal with the static cred store? Is this going to replace Vault? Is Boundary going to replace Vault or something like that? I want to add, the static cred store within Boundary is really designed for that day one experience, for getting up and running with Boundary, creating a sandboxed environment without necessarily needing to go through the process of deploying Vault or peering Boundary with your production Vault environment. It's never going to kind of replace Vault's secrets management capabilities. We have one secrets management solution within HashiCorp that's very much Vault. We won't kind of re-implement any of the more mature features that Vault has as far as secrets management goes. So things like rotation of credentials or minting single use or dynamic credentials are things that we'll never have within that static cred store, but as kind of a day one workflow for understanding the value that Boundary can provide and kind of this comprehensive just-in-time access model that obfuscates things like credentials and network access from end users, it can be pretty powerful to just drop in a static secret within a cred store and add that to your target, so that you can see from an end user perspective, they never really need to worry about that once an admin adds in that secret. So that's one other thing that I'd kind of add on the static cred store, because that's like whole Boundary versus Vault, like what is the static cred store thing, is something that we frequently get when we go over the static cred store stuff.
Got it. And we have one more question. Will Boundary support IPv6?
That is an excellent question. I am going to punt on that one because I am not sure if that's not something we already support, and we can add that into the comments.
Cool. Yeah. So if the question asker would like to clarify a little bit more, we appreciate it. If you've run into an issue with testing, et cetera, or work using it with IPv6, let us know. All right. So I think we're going to go to demo since we are we've got a lot going on. I think it's Bo who's next. So I'm going to add Bo to the stream and then I'll have him share screen. So it is all yours.
All right. So today I'll just be showing off just spinning up a cluster and then connecting it to your first target. So I logged into my HashiCorp Cloud Platform here. You can see that there's a Boundary tab now. And deploying a cluster is very simple. Just hit deploy and then name your cluster. And then yeah, you're just type in your admin credentials and then deploy. And it's gonna take a few minutes, but it shouldn't take too long. But for the sake of time, I kind of cheated and I pre-created one cluster. So this is basically what it's gonna look like after a few minutes since you hit deploy. And now I can log into my cluster by just hitting Open Admin UI. Anytime now. Interesting.
This is live demo.
Yeah.
The benefit of live demo.
Sweet. Hey, there it
there you
is.
go.
Sorry about that. So I'm gonna sign in to my cluster. So this is gonna be your first time signing experience. So once you sign in, it's gonna prompt you for like you want to do a quick setup or a manual setup. For the sake of the demo, I'm just gonna do a quick setup. And I have my host running on AWS that I prepare for SSH. So I'm just gonna drop in the IP and then next. And yeah, so basically now I created my target and it's ready to be connected to. So now I'm gonna grab that link and then launch my Boundary desktop, which is another app that we ship to give you like easy access to Boundary. So paste in the link that I copied and do another login. Now I'm logged onto my Boundary, and you can see that this is my target that the wizard created for me. So you just inspect it, see what host is available. So now I can start my session by just hitting connect. And I'll get a localhost proxy port, an IP pair, and now to connect, I just do SSH, a sheet, and autocomplete my command. Then let's see, 65115, 65115. Yes, and boom, I'm connected. To my AWS host. And if you go back to the Boundary on cluster on the browser, we can view our active sessions. Stays active, and yeah, you can manage your session. You can terminate it. And once I click that, you can see that now I'm disconnected from the session, and yeah, session becomes terminated. So yeah, that's just a quick demo of spinning up clusters and connecting to your first target.
Awesome. So for those who have not tried Boundary yet and you're looking for an easy way to try it rather than to deploy it yourself, you could create the cluster using HCP Boundary and just Bo went through this workflow. You add your initial target and you can onboard the endpoints that you want to add. One of the things that I wanted to ask as part of Q&A, in terms of target configuration and host catalogs, is this limited to just stuff on AWS, or can I use any HTTP and HTTP target that I want to, or TCP target that I want to add to Boundary's catalog?
Yeah, so currently it's basically any TCP target. So like that could have been HTTP bin, for example, with port 80s, and then you can just make a curl call, and yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Is there anyone? Let's pull it back. I don't think there are any other questions coming in through chat. Let me bring up Johan then, who is going to show us audit logging. So thank you. Let me just add. All right. Oh, the crackle is back.
Is it bad? Is it bad? Is it?
The crackle is back. We've had a little bit of a crackle happening, so I think they'll rejoin. Is there any? So I'll bring. Let's see. Let's bring him back.
Is it better?
Okay. You are better. Yes.
Okay. We'll go through this quickly, and I hope that it stays all right. So, hi everyone, and I'm here to do a quick demo of some audit logging stuff that we introduced in 0.8. And if you want to follow along, This is not going to take 20 minutes. That's advertised here, but I think Rosemary can share the link in the chat so you can follow along yourself. We have this tutorial on the learn.hashcorp.com website that we're going to breeze through quickly today, and just to show you what audit logging looks like today with Boundary. And this is available in OSS, but will eventually be available in HCP Boundary as well. So what we're going to be using today is just the OSS version. So we're going to scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to switch over to my VS Code, where I've already checked out the repository, which is available on GitHub here on this link. So let's switch. And we'll dive straight into the README here. As you can see, it's kind of similar to the what we saw on the other page, just listing some requirements there. And this actually has like a super convenient /deploy that you can use to deploy everything. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of look through the controller configuration that we're going to be using today. So this is HCL. You're all familiar probably with this if you've used any of the HashiCorp products before. This is a boundary configuration. So we've created a basic configuration for running Boundary locally within a Docker Compose environment. And so we have some listeners defined here, including the health check, which is also new in 0.8. And we have some keys. And then importantly, down here, we have the audit events stanza. And you can see that we're logging everything. And we have a STD error sync, which will just output everything to our Docker Compose logs. But we also have a sync for a file, and we want to output to this controller.log file. And once we've done that, later on in the demo, we'll show what it looks like when you import your audit events into the Kibana, the Elk stack, so you can kind of browse your audit events in a nice UI. So the other thing I wanted to mention here as well is the audit config that we have. You can configure yourself what you want to happen to parts of your audit messages that may be sensitive. So for example, we've configured here that secrets, such as passwords that may be input as part of requests, are encrypted in a non-recoverable way. And sensitive information is actually HMAC'd so that you can kind of match it against known information. But you can actually change all of this if you wanted to have a completely plain text audit log. You can change that. The default, I believe, is to encrypt any sensitive information. These might be the defaults actually, but don't hold me to that. You can be sure that the defaults are safe, so you don't have to worry about making it safe by adding configuration. There won't be any passwords in your audit logs just because you forgot to configure Boundary. Anyway, so that's the configuration. Now let's do a deploy, shall we? And so I've just made sure that I have Terraform and Docker Compose installed locally. And as you can see, we can just wait for these things to spin up. The stuff that takes a little bit longer is the Java-based applications. Elasticsearch is a bit of a beast, as you probably know. And once we've got that spun up, we'll run our Terraform. And so the Terraform is just going to create some users and targets and things for us. And there you go. That was actually very quickly. The next thing we can do is just log in to the cluster that we just created locally. And oh, that didn't work apparently. That's all right. We'll just run a Boundary login manually instead. We'll use the auth method ID that was just printed, which is this one here. And I don't have a keyring configured. So normally this would go straight into your keyring, but in this case, I'm just going to be using it on the command line like so. And now I can do, let's see, sessions, list, recursive, for example, no sessions. So I have now API access to the Boundary instance. And we already have all of the audit events enabled. So if we do the Docker Compose, let's see, do we have, actually, I'm not even sure what to do there. I think actually if we dive straight into the audit logs now, we can probably go to this website here. I'm just going to have a quick look before we switch the screen over. Do we? Because it takes a little bit of time to load sometimes. Oh yeah, we can actually access the web interface. Let's do that. So this is the web interface on my local instance. I believe I'm going to have to change to that scope. And then we can log in with user
Yeah, and I
login.
think the crackle is back.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. What worked before was actually reloading, so let me do that.
Okay. In the meantime, I know that a lot of folks have questions, so keep adding them to the chat or the comments. I'll be sure to ask them out loud. So I'll bring back the team and make sure that those questions get answered.
We good? We good?
Yep, we're good again.
Okay, this is a little bit frustrating, but you know, this is just the curse of live demoing something, isn't it? So anyway, this is just the boundary cluster that we just deployed. I'm just going to click around a little bit. These will just turn up as API requests inside of our log. This is not the interesting part. The interesting part is going to be looking at our Kibana dashboards. So, oh, is this one? No. Yes, actually, yes. Great. Okay, this has already created the filter for us. So you can see here now that we're in the. Is this big enough? I'll make it just a little bit bigger. There's a lot of information on this page, but I just want to show how you can easily integrate with existing kind of solutions for working with audit logs, such as this elk stack that we have here. And you can see all of you can see the JSON document here if you like, or you can see the kind of summarized table. Something that I like to pull out sometimes is just looking at the path, for example. You can create a filter on the paths. You can see that the health endpoint has been hit a few times. We've hit the scopes endpoint a few times, and so on. And there's a lot of kind of analytics insights that you can gain from looking at your audit logs, or you can run various workflows on top of it to make sure that if you discover any sort of anomalies, or anything like that in your audit log usage patterns. The sort of stuff that you will have used audit logs for in the past. So that's a really cool demo. Check it out on the Learn page. And hit us up if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Johan. We have a couple questions. I'll add some of the folks back just so that we can answer some questions. All right. So the first question is we'll go back to sort of targets, but what if the target is in a private subnet? So if you have a target that you want to register to Boundary, what happens if that target is in a private subnet? What requirements would you have to have in order to onboard that?
So I can take that one. So in that circumstance, for either Boundary OSS or HCP Boundary, that's a topology that we support, you would just deploy a Boundary worker at the edge of your private network so that it has both inbound connectivity from your clients and control plane. So oftentimes that means that it has to have some, be exposed to some public subnet in your environment, and then ensure that that worker has outbound connectivity to the private network on which your target actually resides. So oftentimes the worker then needs to be available both on a public subnet or at least a client accessible subnet, as well as a private subnet. In the case of HCP Boundary, the way that you would do this is by just running a self-managed worker on your private network or VPC and just connecting that up to the control plane. That's something for which we have, ample documentation and a tutorial, Learn tutorial to kind of go through that process. And then also to add on to that for private targets, as XingLu pointed out, for HCP Boundaries GA will also incorporate support for using those self-managed workers to proxy connections, even to Vault or private Vault instances for integrated secrets management. So even though Vault isn't necessarily a target, we can also use that kind of worker as the network gap model to broker connections, even for like secrets management use cases. So hopefully that's helpful. All something you can do today, either in Boundary OSS or HCP Boundary.
Awesome. And someone asked the question, and I know we partly answered the question, but maybe we can add a little bit more information. Someone asked if they could forward logs to another cloud log aggregator like Splunk or Elasticsearch. So is there a limitation to the aggregators that you could forward it to? Are there certain requirements that you should keep in mind as you forward the logs?
Do you want to take that one, Pete?
If you can take that, I feel like you covered it, but if you want to go for it, or you want me to, so as far as I am aware, the way in which you kind of do that export is via the event log sync. I don't know of any constraints for those aggregators cited. I know that we have examples both on Splunk and kind of the Elk stack done. So I don't really have any other constraints that I would add off the top of my head. If there are any that I think of following office hours, we can be sure to include a note for the actual production version of this.
Cool. Any other follow-up to that one, or there's another question I can ask? Okay. All right. When using a self-managed worker, does the worker need to be open to the public on a certain listening port for incoming requests?
So not necessarily a specific port. It's a it's ultimately configurable within the actual worker HCL config. I believe by default that port is going to be 9201 or 9202. I can't remember whether the controller default port is 9201 or 9202, or the worker is that, but that's the default, but ultimately configurable in that worker config.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else want to answer a question? Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. Randy, I think you're the last one. I'll put you on screen as well as your demo, and I think you're going to show us something upcoming, right? So I'll take everybody off.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to demo some IAM enhancements that will be coming soon in admin UI. But before I show those features, I'll just set the scene. So I've got this user, a few organizations, and a user that needs to access some resources. And they exist under an organization I've called Design. So I'm going to log into desktop and show you that they cannot access anything under product docs organization currently. But what we'd like to do is grant access. As an admin, I'd like to grant access to a target from the product docs org to a user within the design org. So this is something that's long been available in CLI and the API, and we're excited to make this available in admin UI. All right, so I've got my admin UI up here, and you can see the three orgs. I'm going to navigate into my product docs org, and I've got this project. So the first enhancement you'll notice is that projects now have groups and roles available. And I'll show you how this works. So if you go into a group, you can now add members from other scopes. So I'm just going to add my user here to my doc collaborators group. All right, and then under roles, I've got this role, doc creators, and similar for principals. You can add users and groups from other scopes. Really handy, so you can get pretty granular with your permissions. And this is useful because I have this user. Actually, I'm going to use the group here. So I've got this group that contains users from other orgs. And just for good measure, I'm going to demo that you can also add groups and users from other orgs directly to your role. So we're just going to add them into this role. This role happens to already have permissions on the target that I've created. So if I go back over to Boundary Desktop and navigate back to targets, you can see that I now have access to this this target, and even though I'm logged into the design organization. So that's it. Pretty straightforward. We're excited you can get really granular with these permissions now. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, I'll add everybody back then. Okay, so I think that's pretty much the last set of questions. We talked a lot about a lot of features and a lot of interesting things. And I think there's clearly some exciting things that people are looking forward to between HCP Boundary as well as the IAM enhancements. There's another question about MFA. Can I add MFA to Boundary with simple credentials for users?
Yeah, I can fill that one. So to use MFA with Boundary, the way that you would kind of use that is through configuring an auth method from your preferred OpenID Connect vendor, so your Okta or Azure AD or otherwise. Within that IDP, you can configure MFA, and then that way, anytime you log into Boundary, it ensures that you've got to go through some MFA process with the IDP to be able to be exposed, to get access and authenticate as that user within Boundary. So that's very much supported.
Yeah, but it requires an IDP to be set up, correct? Like I can't just use
Correct.
username,
So
password.
that is the caveat, is that like the native authentication methods within Boundary that don't rely on that external identity provider don't have native support for MFA. But I want to be clear with that nuance that that doesn't mean that you can't use MFA with Boundary. Just our static username and password auth method doesn't support MFA.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so I think we're wrapping up on questions for today. If people are trying out HCP Boundary or Boundary and they're interested in providing their feedback, or they have some questions or comments, how can they reach out to the team? What's a good way for them to provide their feedback?
That is an excellent question. So there's two primary ways that we kind of collect feedback from our set of users. For Boundary OSS, you can go to our Boundary GitHub repository and leave a comment, suggestion, or issue there. That's publicly available, and we can. I also highly recommend folks go there because we've got a lot of feature asks in that repository, and we very much kind of pay attention to where the upvotes are and use that to prioritize future investments and where our features go. On the HCP Boundary side, so Boundary Cloud Service feedback, you can give feedback in Boundary OSS, or if there's more specific feedback that you'd like to see within the cloud service, you can also go to HCP Boundary, or excuse me, HCP's request or suggestion link, where we also collect that feedback. I don't have either of those links offhand. However, if somebody could help me out with those by putting them into chat, that would be super helpful. But those are kind of the two primary methods that we use. I would also surface kind of our discuss forums as a way to go through and kind of share feedback about Boundary and collaborate on solutions with the community. But more so than any of the discuss forums, we very much look at kind of the actual GitHub repository most often.
Excellent. I am pulling up the feedback form just so folks can drop a note about HCP Boundary. And finally, I don't know if we answered this question explicitly or not, but speaking of what's next, right? I know some people are interested in what's the sort of next features for Boundary as well as HCP Boundary. So what can we expect in Boundary 0.10, which is, we talked about that a little bit, as well as HCP Boundary in general?
Okay, that's always what everybody wants to know. For Boundary 0.10, which is going to be coming up imminently, again, first rule of product management is don't give dates, but as an example, Randy showcased the IAM management enhancements in the admin UI. That's something that we can commit to, is already in main, will be in Boundary 0.10. The other kind of core focus of Boundary 0.10 is that we'll add enhancements for some of our credential management workflows, specifically for SSH. both in the static credential store as well as through our integration with Vault. There's some long-standing requests around SSH credential management. I won't go into specifics there. I'll leave some of that as a surprise for actual 0.10 and not kind of spill the beans. But that's something that will be coming out, shortly, and something that we're really excited to have out in the community and to also be able to demo at a future office hours. We didn't want to completely, let the cat out of the bag for 0.10 before the release. So that's on the 0.10 side. On the HCP Boundary side, you can expect HCP Boundary to also get those kind of features and capabilities from 0.10. And then the other thing is that as we kind of move towards GA, there's a couple key things to keep in mind that we'll be working on. So the first is kind of enterprise grade support plans and SLA. So that's something that we'll have by the time that we roll out. GA is kind of the basic fundamentals of any cloud service. Additionally, as XingLu cited, we'll have that kind of self-managed worker topology so that we can support credential management even for private Vault environments. So that'll be kind of an enhancement beyond the beta for when we go to GA. And then lastly is kind of like a broad set of solutions that I again, won't necessarily talk about publicly, but the cloud service will have certain use cases and features that are really tied towards enterprise governance scenarios and kind of enterprise grade security controls. Those will be released in HCP Boundary. So we'll have a set of new capabilities, that even go beyond Boundary OSS's capabilities. So those will also be happening in due time. And actually, the first of those will be released in parallel to 0.10.
Awesome. Thanks. I think that is all we have on questions. A lot of people are really excited to hear about the different features, as well as exploring Boundary a little bit more. In terms of sort of next things that are coming up, if you haven't heard already, HashiCorp Global is taking place October 4th to 6th in Los Angeles. You can sign up at hashiconf.com/global. Check it out. I'm sure the Boundary team will have something there. Some sessions as well as some interesting pieces of information. You can always ask your questions as well at HashiConf. So with that, I think we're going to close out a little early today. I appreciate those who tuned into chat, asked your questions. We love all of the questions that you've posted. In terms of next office hours, keep track by checking out the live tab in our YouTube channel. That is the most up-to-date information on the next live streams for office hours. And with that, thank you so much, Boundary team. I'm not going to go through the list of names again, but thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you going in and answering all of these questions. So with that, thank you very much. And we'll close out the office hours.